Great. Okay, we'll get going then. So yes, hello and welcome to this final session of the 10-day challenge. It's been a fortnight of fascinating learning and debate, and today we're going to round off with an exciting panel discussion from a slightly different perspective. So young voices are echoing across the world, demanding action for our planet, and still the field of sustainability is made up mostly of experienced and older systems thinkers. Well, systems thinking is based on the assumption that we consider all perspectives, and the perspective of younger professionals is quite often missing. So today we've brought together some young professionals who share the purpose and the passion that's brought us all together over the last 10 days, and they are already influencing how this space is evolving. So we'll start by hearing from them their vision for the role of business in transforming the economy for the benefit of people and planet, and also their thoughts on what we're doing well and where we need to be doing more. So it's great, I can see some familiar faces and names in the audience, and that's great because we want to hear from you and what you think as well. So whether you identify as young or not so young, please do share your thoughts and questions and challenges in the chat box, because we do have 15 minutes for an open discussion at the end. So please make sure you're putting those in throughout so that we can prepare those. So with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our speakers, who will start by setting the scene and sharing with us their vision of the role for business in creating a sustainable, socially just, nature-positive economy. So speakers, please do keep your answers to just 1 minute at this point. So we'll start off with Ryan Twyford, who is an analyst and researcher at Little Blue Research, which is an independent consultancy which specializes in the measurement and valuation of natural and social capital. So Ryan, over to you. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think businesses obviously have quite a direct impact on nature and biodiversity, through consumption and use of natural capital for their products and services. But I think there's also a huge influence from the outside, from governments, from consumers, from NGOs, and from shareholders. And I think while there's an increasingly positive influence coming from the outside, I'm not sure if it's happening fast enough to meet really the ambitions that we need to be meeting for something kind of on such a big scale, really globally. And I think businesses can really be, or should really be, more proactive to get ahead of it, and invest now so that it's a problem we don't have to face in the future.
Absolutely, thank you. Next we have Fiammetta Duke, who is studying for an MA in photography and visual design at NABA Milan. She has a background in biology and is interested in using art and science to spread knowledge on environmental issues. Fiammetta, over to you.
Hello. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a different topic, so bear with me. So what struck me during my current photography studies was kind of the realization that the reason any photographer becomes a part of the history of art is down to the investment of private collectors, making the works relevant and valuable. But the private collectors investing in the art world are in turn influenced by curators and academics who study the works. So now if we think about how this applies to natural capital and businesses, the analogy I'm trying to make is that influencing businesses to invest in natural capital is really the key in building a sustainable, socially just, nature positive economy, because, well, businesses and their investors are the ones that drive societal change. So yeah,
I like that analogy a lot. Makes sense. Thank you. Next is Siddharth Srikanth, who is a joint MBA MPP candidate at Stanford and Harvard. Formerly, he was an environmental consultant at McKinsey in London, and now is involved in a startup exploring ways to integrate carbon and ecosystem service markets. So Siddharth, over to you. He appears to be frozen. Potentially we'll come back to Siddharth. We will do that. I hope that his connection reinstalls soon. Siobhan.
Hi, I'm internet is back.
You are there. Hi, go ahead. Go ahead, Sadat. No, okay, I think that's still quite frozen. We'll come back to you. Maybe if you want to turn your video off, you might have a better connection. So Siobhan Stewart is an ESG consultant.
Hello, hi, can you hear me okay?
Just about. Go on, Sid, you go first, then I'll follow you.
Okay, go ahead, Sid. No, I'm sorry. I think we're gonna go ahead, Sid, and then we'll come back to you. So Siobhan, as I was saying, she is an ESG consultant at Cillian, and she works to provide strategic and technical advice to corporates on their sustainability initiatives and reporting. And formerly, she was with us at the Capitals Coalition and worked on this We Value Nature programme. So Siobhan.
Hi, everyone. Well, I think there's an awful lot to get done in the next 30 years if we're going to achieve the transition that we want. And entities that are going to do this and probably do this most efficiently are going to be businesses. And I think the energy sector is a really good example of it, where almost every solar panel and every wind turbine out there has been touched, developed, curated and managed by a business. And we've seen the efficiency of that increase as the cost of installation and management hugely decrease over the last 10 years. But to say that all of that has been a result of the incentive structures being right and in a complex system, and when we're speaking at the aggregate level of business, entities, be they businesses or be they people, orientate with regard to the incentives that they're given. So making sure that we get that piece right means that businesses can fulfill that role and hopefully get this done.
Yeah, great. And good to hear that specific sector also referenced. Really interesting. Joan Olivella, he works at B Lab Spain, which is a global network that creates standards, policies and tools for business. And famously, they certify the companies known as B Corps. So Jan, over to you, and I'm sure that you have a lot to say about your passion for business as a force for good.
Of course, thank you so much, Isabel. It's a pleasure to be here. And well, first of all, I would say like a main thing like the businesses should do would be like to become a main driver as a non-party stakeholder of the race to become carbon neutral. This famous race called Race to Net Zero, promoted by the UNFCCC and driven by Gonzalo Muñoz, which by the way is a climate champion of COP25 and main driver as well of the B Corp movement and this movement of businesses of becoming a force for good. And so that would be one, this race and being a driver to become like carbon neutral. And then the second one, considering, I would say, all stakeholders when taking decisions, not just environment, but all the stakeholders, such as we promote in the B Corp movement, and therefore moving from shareholder primacy to stakeholder capitalism. So those two would be in the main topics, and I might discuss them a little bit more later. Thank you so much.
Great, and looking forward to hearing more of your thoughts on that. And now we have Alexandra Esteve, who is a former investment banker at Rothschild, and now she works for Savo Project Developers, which is a company focused on developing sustainable assets across sub-Saharan Africa, where she focuses on asset bankability and financing. So Alex, please share your thoughts.
Hello, everybody. I think I tried to approach this in a three-layer system. So I think the three ways that I see businesses can play an important role in creating the sustainably and socially just nature positive economy or driving this transition towards this. So I think business have a very important role as innovators to provide better solutions to both consumers and other businesses. I also think that the second role for businesses is to drive consumer behavior. Although this can be a little bit dangerous, businesses can influence consumers to make better choices. And I think there is also a role for businesses to influence other businesses, to drive, to allow businesses to make better choices, or to sort of drive, help them make better decisions, but also maybe provide information to consumers for businesses to make better choices.
Excellent, really very interesting, thank you. Let's try back with Siddharth, if you are connected again. I know you were trying to connect on your phone.
That's right. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, so this has been super interesting already. I think in my mind, businesses have for too long seen nature as one of two things, either as a resource that should be extracted and used in the course of business, or something kind of entirely separate from their remit. So I think what I'd like to see for business is to see, for both those camps, to see nature as an intrinsic part of their economy and the way they do business, and establish the business case for preserving nature. I think that's what we need from businesses who realize that over the medium and long term, especially, nature can meaningfully improve their bottom lines, and preserving it is worth doing. So that's sort of what I'd like to see from businesses constructing a socially just, nature positive economy.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks everyone. I think that sets the scene really very well for the discussion that we're about to have. And I'm going to pass over to my colleague Polly, who's going to take you through a couple of questions that we have for you. Polly.
Oh, thank you, Isabel. And I just realized we didn't introduce ourselves. Isabel, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
That's a very good point, Polly. Thank you. So I'm Isabel Hoffman. I'm a manager at the Capitals Coalition, and I work primarily with agricultural businesses, trying to get them to include the value of natural, social, and human capital in their decision making, and currently also working on a program to integrate ocean-based businesses into this conversation. Polly.
Perfect. And if you want to find out a bit more about the oceans work Isabel's doing, she just published a blog the other day, so you can go check that out. So I'm the communications officer at the Capitals Coalition, and really excited to be putting together this panel today. And I'm particularly interested, working in the communications field, particularly by Fiametta's point there on kind of the analogy between the art world and how we can make the business case for protecting and safeguarding nature, and then also Alexandra's point about business shaping consumer demand. So taking this out broadly now, what I don't know if Fiametta or Alexandra want to pick this up. What do you think needs to change in the conversation for businesses, to the role of businesses in changing consumer demand? Or do you think it goes the other way around and it's consumer demand and businesses respond to that? What do you think needs to happen here? Oh, Fiametta, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I can start then. Yeah, I mean, of course, the things that like limit business ability to act include things like the absence of supportive regulations, lack of knowledge, lack of data for biodiversity impacts, maybe share in general the whole current global economic model, like not really encouraging sustainability in business. And but I feel these points kind of have been touched on during these 10 days, but what I wanted to maybe add to the conversation is kind of an expansion of the problem of shareholders not being interested in nature, which I think is linked to insufficient consumer demand for sustainable products. So yeah, most people just want cheap products, and there has still not been a significant shift towards buying from sustainable sources. And this again allows me to mention the creative industry and kind of the big role it can have in influencing consumers. And yeah, I don't know if you saw, but I mentioned for the Get Inspired Challenge 2 really powerful magazine publications using art and image culture as kind of a driving force for environmental activism. And they're called Atmos and The Earth Issue. So I strongly recommend checking them out because they have great content and aesthetics. And also, yeah, I want to mention Bosco Verticale here in Milan, which it translates to vertical forest, and it's a pair of residential towers designed by the architect Stefano Boeri. And it contains more than 900 trees. And again, it's a great example of kind of a creative nature-based solution. So yeah, I thought that was kind of missing from the conversation.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. And Alexandra, do you want to chime in now?
Yeah, sure. I think back to the point of how businesses can drive and shape consumer behavior. Of course, I think that the point that Fiametta mentioned, that often people just go for the cheapest alternative. I think we're faced with a problem where a lot of people don't have the choice but to pick the cheapest alternative. So I think this is where the role of businesses can be super interesting, because they can innovate to bring those alternatives at a similar price. So how can we provide sustainable alternatives to our consumers that are affordable to them? And I think this is where they can help innovate. And in terms of driving that behavior, they can be the ones delivering the message and educating and providing transparent information so that consumers can make the right choice and continue to make the right choices in the future.
That's a really interesting point there. And it makes me think of Siobhan's point earlier about the role of incentive mechanisms. Do you want to add to the conversation here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I probably have maybe an interesting thing to say around the shareholder piece and maybe how that fits in, because in terms of what I'm seeing, which is sitting between those investors and those businesses, there's an interesting sort of tug of war going on between those asset managers and the businesses that they're investing in that the asset managers are increasingly under pressure from asset owners, be them large pension funds or high net worth individuals that really want to make sure their portfolios are aligned to this sustainable transition. And we often find that those pressures then kick down to business. But in order for businesses to respond and really respond, and this probably speaks to businesses which have a big impact on natural capital and on nature more generally, is that if they want to do more than tinker outside the edges, it's going to require a huge outlay of capital and probably a huge change to their strategy, which might influence their ability to generate returns in the short term. So the extent to which asset managers are willing to accept that risk and potentially accept those slightly reduced returns in the short term is something that's interestingly playing out at the moment. And I don't think we've sort of seen quite what that means for people. We've seen Danone struggling with that most recently, but then other companies like Unilever hopefully trying to bring their shareholders along by asking them to vote on their climate transition plans in their upcoming AGM. So I think a lot of it does speak to the fact that these incentive structures aren't quite right yet. And whether it's playing with access to and cost of capital at the margins, or maybe it's around making sure that this social license to operate piece and consumer demand really speaks to kind of changing these incentive structures so that hopefully shareholders feel more willing to accept that reduced return and businesses are able to do what they need to do, which is align their strategies and make changes.
Brilliant. Did I see Sid's hand go up? Yeah, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, Siobhan, that's a super interesting point. And I think the cost of capital piece is it's easier said than done, but I think businesses have a role to play in making the case for how asset managers and their investors, what they demand of them. And so I think Unilever's done a particularly good job of communicating that with shareholders, but it's true of smaller companies as well, where they might not have, they might not be able to make quite as big of a splash. I see in the comments there's a sort of shareholder versus stakeholder debate. I completely agree. I just think business can do more to more clearly lay out the link between medium and long-term profits and their actions today, especially for long-term shareholder value, which many asset managers are already fully aligned on. So I think the alignment piece it's certainly not there yet, but I feel like there's more alignment than we think if businesses can more clearly communicate why nature is good for long-term shareholder value.
Great. So Joanne, you're nodding along pretty intently there. Do you want to add to that at all?
I just wanted to say I completely agree. So yeah, I was completely agreeing everything you said. Thank you.
And Ryan, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting point. And actually earlier in the week, there was a Coca-Cola session, and it was really interesting points made. I think around 7 pilot projects that they were doing just around the world, and only 2 of them weren't projected to have a return on investment within 10 years. And I mean, the most successful project, which was, I think, the restoration of a peat bog, was in 4 months. And so I think with these pilot projects and with more happening in the area, I think it's kind of maybe almost inevitable that investors start to see and shareholders start to see that there is genuine value in investing now.
So that's a really interesting point. And I think it goes back to you a little bit what you mentioned in the kind of your opening statement there around kind of the proactivity needed in business now, and how business can kind of function as more of a catalyst. And so I don't know if you want to expand on that point there about where you see kind of, it's supposed to be the decade of action, but do you see more short-term potential for business really driving this agenda forward?
I think it's kind of not only would the actions now benefit the environment and society, I think there needs to be more of an understanding that this action now will benefit the business in the longer term. Kind of you get ahead of risks. So say changes in legislation you can get ahead of before they happen, or trying to meet consumer demand before it changes, or even things like measuring a business's dependencies on nature, so you have a better understanding of how they could be affected in the future and what they need to do to really mitigate those negative impacts.
Some really great points there, thank you. So we're going to bring it over to Joanne now. Don't know what angle you want to take here, where you want to direct this conversation, wherever you want to take it.
Thank you so much, Pauline. Always using the wild card. So actually, one point came out to my mind right now. I remember when I was at COP25 last year, well, actually 2 years ago, and there were almost no businesses there. You know, even though it's the most important climate change conference and where the most important decisions regarding climate change are taken, and there were almost no businesses there, and they were not taken that much into consideration, in not just as a party stakeholders, but also within the IPCC. And this year, actually, at COP25, was the first climate champion, was Gonzalo Muñoz, who was the first businessman to be a climate champion. All the others were, in this case, you know, either scientists or politicians. So I think business leaders need to embrace as well the science and being in the conversations within the IPCC as well. I was the only one maybe there in the whole room. I still remember, and I believe like business leaders, including myself, which I have no idea about science, but I'm trying to, you know, learn every day more about, you know, all of you, because I believe you're all scientists or in the field as well. So I wanted to say that as well, because I think it's a crucial point that we business leaders embrace nature and also science, and we're in that conversation, including COP25 in the highest climate change level conversation. So yeah, more of a comment, and I don't know what you think about that.
Oh, that's a really, really interesting point. Kind of how do we connect these different kind of siloed departments and bring them together into the system that we do operate in. And so building on that, I wonder if you want to talk on, you know, speaking as B-Lab, if you want to talk on what you believe the role of standard setters is in driving business action, and how that perhaps relates to their engagement with scientists, with civil society, and governments as well.
I think a lot of has been discussed regarding stakeholder management. We from B-Lab promote that businesses use businesses as a force for good. And well, we actually have like 3 main requirements in order to become a B Corp. 1, have a very high performance regarding social and environmental standards. And we're the ones promoting these standards as a way of improving and managing the impact that business have, and not as a reporting tool such as the GRI, but rather a managing tool. And so that will be 1. But also a second requirement is a legal framework. Businesses need to incorporate a legal framework that consider all stakeholders in all their decisions, including the environment. So it's moving really from shareholder primacy to stakeholder capitalism. And I believe this is crucial, not just in the performance and the decisions that business take, but also that is a requirement in the legal status and as a legal requirement, and not just a benefit corporation, but rather in their corporate bylaws. So I think this is a crucial point as well that business need to take. And just, well, we're already 4,000 B Corps all over the world, but we still need millions of B Corps. So I hope if you're not a B Corp, I'm obviously inviting you to become one. It's a tough way to go, but still go ahead and start improving your impact and become a certified B Corp.
Thanks for the plug. Siobhan, I saw you giving a thumbs up there. Do you want to add to that at all?
No, it was definitely a thumbs up and a build on to what was just being said, particularly around standards and trying to make sure that this route is as clear as possible for businesses, because in those that I'm talking to, it's definitely split really explicitly between two groups, one of which is the sort of FTSE 100 who are approaching this with teams of 20 to 30 staff, and they know what the regulation is and they're able to evolve with it. But then on the other hand, as you move through the FTSE 250, that tends to drop off a cliff. And who I tend to find myself speaking to is a tired and overworked head of investor relations or head of communications that doesn't know what TCFD means or doesn't necessarily know what the EU taxonomy is. So I think, yes, speaking to that point is, if we can be as clear as possible within those standards and as clear as possible to try to provide a framework, be that NGOs providing tools or advisory services, it all speaks to helping those smaller businesses who maybe are just starting to see the value in this, provide a track forward that's as clear as possible.
That's a really great point there, thank you. Oh, Sid, you got your hand up. Do you want to jump in?
I completely agree, and I just want to extend that point. I think if you leave major markets with liquid stock markets and reporting and so on, I think you have a whole swath of businesses who have a huge impact on nature, who are effectively outside of mainstream reporting. And so in a world where I'm thinking of businesses in Indonesia, for example, where I used to work, large family-owned conglomerates. They're often not even public companies. They'd love to do something on nature or climate change, but they have, as it currently stands, they have massive impacts to, palm oil or, other kinds of agriculture or mining. I think, and I'm thinking out loud here, but I do wonder if there's an opportunity to help bring some of these tools and frameworks to businesses across the world, particularly in markets that don't demand the same reporting standards.
Great. And Fiametta, I saw your hand go up there.
I think, I mean, talking about standards and like businesses getting involved with other organizations, I think like it's really important, like collaboration is completely key. I mean, like it's just really promising to see the increasing collaboration across sectors and the kind of continuous strengthening of bonds between businesses and especially NGOs working hand in hand to kind of align the market with environmentally friendly policies. And I think also a good example was the Heidelberg cement being partnered up with BirdLife International for already like 10 years now. And yeah, it's really promising, I think, to see strong partnerships between local, international and corporate partners, combining knowledge, experience and standing all together.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball now. So I think personally I've been seeing shifts in conversation over this past year. The pandemic has kind of made it very clear that we need to be valuing not only our natural capital but our social and human capital far more as well. So I'm wondering who's going to be the person to throw this to. I might go Siobhan. Might go down to Ryan's got his hand up as well. So how do you see business building in sustainability that means not just for nature but for people too?
I mean, if you missed it earlier today, I was actually supporting a session on the integrated capitals assessment and the principles behind that, and it's really all about this. It's about how you can integrate not just natural capital but all of the capital, so human, social, how they interact with each other and stakeholders as well. Really, when you look at everything in a holistic picture, maybe the solution's a completely different one than if you were just looking at it from the nature perspective. And so I think really using frameworks like that to see the whole picture and maybe come up with outcomes that you wouldn't have otherwise had if you hadn't considered, say, local communities, which might have some role in aiding the whichever natural capital problem you might have.
It's great. And Siobhan, ready to go.
Ready to go. Yeah, I guess a slightly different point, but building on it is this social license to operate piece and how it influences people and how different generations are starting to talk about this, because previously businesses trying to protect that or trying to engage with stakeholders would have done it through a very curated system. You got your piece in the FT, or you released a press release, or you engaged in quite curated areas. Whereas now a lot of these conversations are going on social media platforms, and a lot of them are in very uncurated zones that aren't necessarily visible to these businesses. And so I think it's a potential real lever for change, and we shouldn't underestimate just how much execs and boards are worried about this, because different generations have different ideas about what is morally good and what we should be bringing in terms of what the role of businesses are, and those conversations aren't necessarily always visible to them, and it's something that we can definitely leverage because it's new and very, very fast moving.
Brilliant. Brings us so ever so neatly into our Q&A. So thanks for that, Siobhan. So just putting up the questions now. Shall we start with Sally's question here? How do you think a focus on nature changes the conversation with business compared to the broader discussions around sustainability? Does anyone want to jump in there, or shall I pick? Maybe we can bring it over to Alexandra.
Could you repeat the question, Polly? I can't see the chat. Yeah.
How do you think a focus on nature changes the conversation with business compared to broader discussions around sustainability? So the focus on nature versus sustainability as a broader concept.
I think one is tied to the other fundamentally, and nature has to be part of the sustainability strategy. And I think building on Ryan's point from before, I think it's very important to look at the picture holistically, and businesses cannot be looking at only nature or only people, but rather focus on a holistic approach that can deliver a solution that is long-term and viable. Because if you focus only on nature, then you're solving one problem while you may be neglecting or increasing the other problem. And I think in general, if we focus on one issue at the time, then we're going to have the next issue come up again. So for example, if I focus on my strategy on plastics instead of carbon, then in 5 years, we're going to have a carbon problem. And then we're going to fix our carbon, then the plastics is going to come back. So I think if you don't integrate nature into your sustainability, and I think in the world today, sustainability and nature is ingrained within sustainability, but you must include both of them. I would not agree with looking at one rather than two.
Brilliant. And so I'm wondering if, Sid, if you wanted to build on that more, particularly regarding your opening statement that was referencing how business is part of nature. It's not external to it. Where do you think sustainability and nature kind of sit in that?
Right. I think I have a slightly different take. I think it's possible, or businesses certainly see it as possible, to have kind of sustainable operating models and businesses that come at the cost of nature. And so I think you can see a world in which businesses are carbon neutral and have sort of supply chain security, and then feel like that is sustainable. And I do think nature is seen as a kind of add-on within many businesses. So part of what I was thinking at the opening statement was it's certainly possible to conceptualize sustainability as do my customers see me as sustainable, as good for the planet and so on. Choose a few narrow ways to do that. It might just be carbon, it might be workers' rights, it might be something else, and then use that as a selling point. But I think all of us and others in the ecosystem need to elevate nature within that conversation. So it's seen as quite an important plank, if not one of the most important planks to make a sustainable business. I was just reflecting on what I've seen, in consumer brands particularly, where you do see, an increased focus on worker rights and supply chain transparency, and those are seen as sustainable brands, even if they come at great cost to natural ecosystems, which they take materials from.
It's a really interesting point. Thank you. Fiammata, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think focusing on nature does kind of change the conversation compared to a broader focus on sustainability, because I feel like climate change has been in the conversation for kind of a long time, but now there's sort of like a shift to biodiversity, and it's kind of gaining prominence. So I think, in my opinion, like first focusing on nature inside the sustainability bubble kind of reignites the conversation. And yeah, I think it just provides a new, well, more of a way to convince people to go on. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
Great. Well, before we jump into some more questions, I want to raise something, another curveball, as Polly says. I feel the conversation, we focused a lot on compliance and what business ought to be doing because they're being told they ought to do it. But I'd be really interested to hear from the panel, what's the opportunity for business? Because there is a significant opportunity for them to flourish by looking at their natural capital. And I'd be interested to hear how you see this and how you're incorporating that into your work. And I might pick on Joanne first, if I may, to see what you think about this.
Sounds great. Well, first of all, I like in the United Nations Environment Program report, and there's a specific section talking about the synergies that outweigh the trade-offs in incorporating sustainability, including, nature-based solutions within the business, and also including in the government. So if we take that into consideration, I believe like business have more synergies and trade-offs and have potential benefits to mitigate and adapt from climate change than rather not doing it. So it's not just that they're doing like something good for the environment and adapting and mitigating also the worst effects of climate change, but also is having a great effect on their business, including, for example, having better efficiency, adapting all their supply chain to the droughts or floods that might be happening in their supply chain as well. So I believe like this is critical to convene it as well to all businesses, that there are more synergies and more benefits than in this case and potential trade-offs. So I think there's a way to go for business as well, and to have that in mind as well.
Thanks. I wonder, Alexandra, if you want to come in here as well and talk about the benefits that you're seeing in your work from applying a natural capital lens and taking in the idea of nature-based solutions into the projects that you're developing.
Yeah, certainly. I think applying nature-based solutions to businesses and looking at that can help businesses like see the benefits both on like a downstream perspective of their supply chain and an upstream perspective from their supply chain, right? If you and you mitigate a lot of risks and allow businesses to increase profits by mitigating risks like ahead of everybody else, right? So if you're looking at carbon offsetting, that if you're planting trees, it's not necessarily only going to offset your carbon and allow you to produce like net zero produces, but it might also improve the water streams that your factory is using in close proximity. So I think it's all about the synergies that happen like downstream and upstream from your supply chain, or even looking at like the life of cycle of products post sale, let's say. So if you can see how like the waste, how all of that can encompass into your solution, you can see a lot of benefits. For example, if you start like recycling or reducing the amount of packaging that you use, all of that is going to have positive impacts on profitability while having great impacts on sustainability of your product.
Excellent. I think that outlines a great few options for opportunities that do exist for business. So thanks for that. I'll take a question from the Q&A box. We've got one from Raquel here saying, how can businesses influence other businesses? For example, how important is the role of supply chain management and defining policies and guidance that suppliers should adhere to? I would like to ask Siddharth to comment on this from your experience with business. How are you factoring in the ambition to influence other businesses in the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. And I only dabbled in this when I was at McKinsey, but I left with a tremendous sense of how powerful big business could be in influencing all of the downstream and upstream businesses that aren't necessarily subject to the same shareholder pressure or standards or whatever it might be. I do think, especially large businesses that source substantial amounts from emerging markets, have a huge role to play here. I'm thinking of big consumer brands, I'm thinking of mining companies, thinking of anything that produces, finished goods. I do think they have a tremendous role to play, but the one caveat to all this, I think, is we do have to balance, pushing supplies in the right direction with not making the terms so onerous that only players in most developed markets can participate. So it's a tricky balance to strike where you meet suppliers where they currently are and give them the tools and support to help them transition to more sustainable and nature positive business models. But I don't think we can start with extremely high standards and no support.
Yeah, really interesting. And Siobhan, you also work with a number of businesses. Do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Sid's point. We're dealing with a distributor at the moment and trying to work out how they should approach scope 3. And an awful lot of data is required from the supply chain, and an awful lot of these producers are all across the world, and some are good at this and some are not so good. And so what we're trying to do is work out who's got what, and then hopefully start pairing up some of these businesses so that they can share best practice and findings, because there's some which have very consistent processes in place and some which have none and don't know even how to start. So hopefully if we can help support by providing templates, providing tools, and then that's one way that we can go about it. But it's definitely a challenge to say the least.
Excellent. We like to hear about collaboration at the Coalition, as you know, so great to hear that you're working towards that. I'll hand back to Polly for one last question, but we are running out of time, so we're going to have to keep that to 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, we'll keep it brief. I'm wondering now, so building on that previous point, and relating to a couple of the questions, well, a common theme in some of the questions that we're seeing here, kind of what do you see are going to be the barriers that we need to remove now to get businesses to act more quickly, to really catalyze this transformation? So that greater collaboration and providing the tools that Siobhan just mentioned there would be a start. I wonder if anyone else has any more suggestions. Might throw it over to Ryan first, if that's all right.
Yeah, well, I think in a lot of cases the tools are there. Like in the past week, there's been a number of sessions on things like the task force for nature-related financial disclosures, or the science-based targets for nature, that kind of really help companies do these things. But from my experience kind of working with groups and businesses, there's this perceived kind of so many different things and frameworks, kind of which one do I choose? And I think it's more of a get started doing something, kind of anything, and then develop it as you go along. So maybe it's more of a perceived barrier than an actual barrier.
Great. And then I think we're going to go for the last comment from Joanne here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, so that you understand, it's not just the toolbox and the potential legal requirements as well that companies should adapt, but also the pressure that companies should put on other companies as well. And so you understand a little bit about what I'm trying to say here is when the IPCC published the 1.5 degree report in 2018, they basically stated that in order to achieve the Paris Agreement targets, companies and governments and the whole world need to be carbon neutral by 2050. And then this was just 2 years ago. And since then, there has been this race promoted by the UNFCCC, and more and more businesses have pledged to become carbon neutral by not just 2050, but 2030. And the point I want to try to stay here is either you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And if you want to be part of the solution, become carbon neutral before 2050, and if necessary, as many big corps have done, in 2030. If you want to be part of the problem in this case, well, in this case, you're going to be carbon neutral from 2050 onwards, but you don't want to become part of the problem as well. So I think like putting some pressure on business is critical in this case.
Excellent. That's a very strong note to finish our Q&A on. So we're going to move into the last section of this panel. I would like to start by saying thank you to everyone for your fantastic contributions. Really great to get your questions in there. And sorry we couldn't get to them all. So these past 10 days have been all about challenging businesses to include natural capital in their decision making. So I'd like to close off the session by asking each of our speakers to share the one challenge that you want to give the audience that you believe will really leverage actionable change. And I'm going to call on each of you in turn, starting with Siobhan, in one sentence, please.
One sentence, God. I think it's to be tightly wedded to the ideal, but not always the ideas. I think in the sustainability sector, we've been pushing these ideas for so long, and suddenly they're being listened to. And at scale, some will work and some might not. And there's a huge audience that is coming to this completely new. And so we're going to have to continue to innovate. And there's an awful lot more innovation to happen. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Fiammetta.
Right, okay, one sentence. Well, I think there is a long way to go, but supporting other scientists and artists that are trying to kind of achieve the same goal is a good start. And particularly, I challenge the people in business to reach out and work with both the arts and science to support action for nature and get people inspired.
Thank you. Ryan.
Yeah, I think keeping in theme of what I've said so far, it'd really be challenged to try and go above and beyond and see, even if it's something small that isn't in a framework or in any of the documentation, what else do you think you could do that's something just a bit extra?
Great. And Joanne?
What you do is the proof of what you believe. If you believe in a better world, act consequently. I invite you, all of you, to act consequently according to science and therefore leading by example.
Excellent. Loud and clear. Alexandra?
I think I invite everybody to learn more, to be able to make the right and appropriate decisions. I think this 10 days have been super interesting. We've learned a lot about different dimensions of natural capital, how they can be applied. And I think the key message from this is there's a lot more to learn, so that I personally can apply it into where I work. But like, I think everybody's in the same position where we have a lot to learn to be able to make decisions and put the right pressures where we need to put them to continue into this path of a more sustainable and just economy.
Thanks, and it's great to hear that you are participating in the sessions. Thank you. And finally, Siddharth.
Thank you. Just to wrap this up, I'd invite all businesses to be as transparent as possible. I think relentlessly measuring, monitoring, and reporting on progress will help businesses learn from each other, gain public trust, and hopefully make meaningful, tangible progress in the next few years.
Great, excellent. And finally, I'd like to issue my own challenge to all of you. To my fellow early career professionals, those on the panel and those on the line, I'd say we have a real responsibility to actively shape the landscape that we want to be engaged in the future. We've got lots of years ahead of us working, so we need to make sure that we're being heard, and not just to follow in the footsteps of those that came before us just because it's the safer and easier option, but to really plough the path that we want to be following. And to those of you who have been active in this space for a while, I challenge you to open your minds and your thoughts to other perspectives, and most importantly, make sure that you don't underestimate youth, because we know a thing or two. So with that, I will pass over to Guy, who will officially close off the We Value Nature 10-day challenge. And I just want to say a massive thank you to the panelists who have been following the sessions for the last 10 days and who've been really inspiring. So thank you.
Very many thanks to you, Isabel and Polly, for guiding us through that really inspiring session. And many thanks, of course, to our panel of young professionals. It's great to hear the energy, the commitment, the ambition, the articulacy of these young professionals, and get their views on how we're doing and where we need to go. I'm Guy Duke. I'm director of We Value Nature, and we've got this last 10 minutes or so of this session with me and with colleagues from the partners that run We Value Nature, the 4 organisations that run We Value Nature, just for a little bit of wrap up of this closing plenary and indeed of our whole 10-day challenge. So the 4 partners: the Institute for Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, International Union for Conservation of Nature, and OPLA. So I will pass the microphone in turn to representatives from each of these organisations to do a little bit of wrapping up. So I'll start with Richard Spencer, my colleague at the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Director of Thought Leadership at the Institute, to say a few words. Richard, you've got a couple of minutes.
Oh,
Thank you very much, and it was a reflection on that rather fantastic panel session we've just had. I think it's great to hear from people who it's starting out on their careers, not because they're young necessarily, but because, of course, you will be leading the businesses. You'll be the leaders of public and business life in these organisations that we hope are going to kind of save us. So it's almost asking you the question in that panel session of what are the organisations you would like to be leading. And I thought it was fantastic to hear the undertone of some of these things. One was really I thought wonderful was not framing the narrative in terms of how can markets and policymakers drive corporate behaviour, but actually completely flipping that and saying how can corporate behaviour drive the change that we want to see. So I think that is fantastic, because that really casts business as actors rather than passive recipients in this world, and underpinning that, of course, is the assumption that often for my generation you have to kind of make the case, but for you it's all assumed, is that the success of our businesses depend upon a successful, thriving natural system, and also a recast of modern capitalism to a stakeholder model from a shareholder model. So I came away feeling enthused and filled with hope for this. So congratulations on that final panel session. I thought it was marvellous.
Thanks so much, Richard, for reflecting on that. And I'll pass straight on to our next colleague, Katja Bonga, who's Manager Redefining Value at World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So Katja's leading up all the training effort on We Value Nature, which is outstanding work. Katja, 2 minutes for you.
Thanks, Guy, and especially a huge thanks to all our amazing panelists today. What a great way to end this 10-day challenge. When we initially came together, all partners, with this idea of running this 10-day challenge event, it was really with an idea of making it as action-oriented as possible and also inspiring as a way to drive change. And I have to say, I've been extremely impressed by the amount of work and efforts that has been put into the 10 days from all of our session leads. And I do want to take the opportunity here to thank all of the different partners and stakeholders that have put the time and effort into running altogether more than 45 sessions across the 10 days. And without these session leads, this would have simply not been possible. So a big shout out to all of those people. And I'd like to wrap up by sharing a bit more of some of the work we'll be doing, continue to do as the We Value Nature team, and specifically around training. I think we've heard a lot of sessions around nature-based solutions. Biodiversity was really high on the agenda during the 10 days as well. And so I'm just excited to share that we are going to be actually starting to develop more training material specifically on nature-based solutions together with the We Value Nature partners here, but also with many colleagues inside at WBCSD. We're also excited to say that we're going to be developing training specifically on biodiversity, so how to actually integrate biodiversity into your natural capital assessments. And finally, we're also in the midst of creating training material that is tailored to the finance sector, which was often brought on during the 10 days and also today with the panelists. So lots of exciting things to come. And I think education and bringing the skills needed is going to be key in this as well. And so I really invite you to stay tuned with some of the materials that we'll be developing. And we also have already a lot of material that is available to you on our website that you're free to download and use as of now. And so I encourage you to do so. So thanks again for everything.
Many thanks, Katja. And I'll hand straight on to Paul Marnie, who is the Director at OPLA, to provide a couple of minutes of thoughts in relation to the communications angle that we are working on. Paul, over to you.
Cheers, Guy. Yeah, really well done to the panel. I think if myself and my peers were half as lucid and smart as you were at your age, we perhaps wouldn't be handing down as many problems and responsibilities to you as the people coming up behind us. But I think you'll do a great job of it. That was really well done. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Just a couple of slides, because I'm going to show you some stats, because I know everyone loves to see some stats. So yeah, it's been really good, and I think, as Katja said, you know, we're indebted to the session leads who've been working with us to run the 45 sessions that have comprised the 10-day challenge. We've had over 300 challenges completed. I think we're probably close to 3,000 session participants. We haven't quite got the numbers in yet, which is good. Lots of social media impressions, and everyone seems generally happy with how it's run, not just us as the team, but from the participants. The sort of feedback scores have been really good. This isn't the end of the journey. I'm sure Guy's going to say something similar to that at the end, but you know, this has been a bit of a launch pad, but you know, do sign up to our mailing list. There's still life left in the We Value Nature campaign. We've got a lot left to do, so you can continue with us on our journey. The Capitals community on Hivebright has been really successful, so you can continue the discussions there. I think my colleague is going to be sharing some of these links in the chat as I go through. And as Katja mentioned, we've got lots of training materials. There's more media resources coming. We've collected some great resources through the 10-day challenge, which we'll be sharing with everybody. If you've missed any of the sessions, the videos will be available, so you can catch up there. Yeah, and again, thanks to the panel. That was a really good session just previously.
Very many thanks, Paul. We are pretty short on time, and we have one final speaker. So Gerard Boss from IUCN, who directs the IUCN's Business and Biodiversity Programme. Gerard, a couple of minutes, if you can keep it to that, as we need to try to finish on time.
Yes, we'll do. So great. I mean, like all the other previous speakers, I really want to thank this panel. You've been the right mirror of all the other events that have happened throughout this 10-day challenge. Inspiring, putting in new thoughts, but also opening our minds. I remember several phrases like, you know, we're not fast enough. We need to be transparent. We need to bring and build the right incentive mechanism. We need to reach out to all stakeholders, and we have to influence the businesses around us as well. So this journey has been super exciting for the last 10 days. It's almost halfway our overall We Value Nature campaign. And we are really thankful to all the participants and contributors to the sessions, because we've got a whole new set of information, training, sessions, interviews that we will capitalize on and make accessible, because we also understood that the barriers is sometimes to take that first initial step. And this is what We Value Nature has been focusing on, so we'll continue to do that. As Katja said, leaning and pushing also the finance sector to help frame this, and making sure that the incentive mechanisms comes to bear is also important. Now, the other item is, as Paul was saying, this is not the end of the journey. It's only the beginning of the journey, and the beginning of the journey for you on this panel. And that's why I want to highlight key events that are coming up where we want to continue these discussions. Already in 2 weeks' time, there's the IUCN Youth Summit coming up between the 6th of April and the 16th of April. So again, great moment for conversations and exchanges on that. The IUCN World Conservation Congress in September will again hopefully be a face-to-face meeting in Marseille, starting on the 3rd of September, trying to gather all those that are interested and want to make progress in the way that we value nature and stop the loss of biodiversity. But then, as was mentioned in this talk, the two COPs that are coming up, the CBD, the ones related to biological diversity, is on. It's back on. It's incoming in China between the 11th and the 24th of October. So again, we want to make sure that a lot of you are there and that there is a strong business presence. You know, like Juan was saying, this was missing in some of the previous COPs, and it was clearly missing in the biodiversity COP. So that's where there's a call to be there also at the climate COP in Glasgow, because nature-based solutions will be a key theme there. So again, huge thanks for this last panel, but it has been at the image of all the other wonderful sessions, and I urge you to go back to the resources that we're making available on the We Value Nature website. Thank you all again.
Very many thanks, Gerard. And well, that brings us to an end to this closing plenary, but also for our 10-day challenge. We do hope it has inspired many of you, many of our thousands of participants, to move forward on your nature journey. We look forward to continuing to engage with you all. It remains for me to thank all those who have contributed to making the 10-day challenge such a success, all our session coordinators, session leads, the speakers, the teams behind them, of course, and of course all of our participants. And we also thank, of course, the European Commission for funding We Value Nature through Horizon 2020. Last of all, I'd like to give a special thanks to Katia Bonga, Caroline von Chelsing and James Atkinson for the really impressive work they've done to pull together the 10-day challenge and run it so smoothly and effectively. Thank you to everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you, take care.